Welcome to this secondary snack. My name's Christina Turner and I'm a lead maths specialist for White Rose Maths. In this secondary snack, we're going to explore similarity. If you use our free schemes of learning, you'll be aware that for each block, we split them into a series of small steps. So here are the small steps for enlargement and similarity, and you can see that it's aimed at Year 9 students and it's due to be delivered in summer term 1. In this snack, we're going to focus on this small step, recognising enlargement and similarity. The reason for this is when I reflect on my own teaching, I think sometimes I've not spent enough time on this step and instead perhaps rushed on to working out missing sides and angles in a pair of given similar shapes. And I haven't really dealt with the misconceptions every time. So I want to have a look to see how we can really allow students some time to explore the idea of similarity. So here is the notes and guidance page for that small step. And again, if you use our schemes, you'll be aware that for each small step, you get the notes and guidance page. In this snack, we're going to have a look mainly at this exemplar question, and we're going to use it to answer these key questions. I'll just give you a moment to read the key questions. Okay, and we're going to start by looking at a question that I posed recently to some Year 9 students about similarity, and it threw up some really interesting misconceptions. So it's an always, sometimes, or never true. And I simply ask, are all rectangles similar to each other? And as always, it's the incorrect answers that are the most interesting. So I had some students saying, well, they're all the same looking shape, so they must be similar. So there's some confusion there with how we use similar in the day-to-day English language and what mathematically similar means. I'm sure that you've used similar in the classroom before without it being mathematical. So for instance, I'm sure I've said, I always get you two confused because you look similar. So it's really getting across the difference between how we use it in the day-to-day language and what mathematically similar means. Another one, true, because all rectangles have 4 straight sides. So again, it's the same misconception around what mathematically similar means. I like this one. So this student said that it's only true if they're both standing up or both on their side. So a real misconception around the orientation of the shape and whether that means the shapes are similar or not. And the last one, it doesn't matter how big or small the rectangles are, the angles are always the same. So that student's got some understanding of mathematically similar shapes. So they understand the angles need to be the same, but they haven't thought about the side length. So just super interesting. Let's have a look at that exemplar question. So Rosie's enlarged a photograph of her and Tommy. Is her enlargement correct? So just looking at that, can you tell if it's correct or not? Perhaps you can just by looking. But how do you know? How are the students going to show whether it's a correct enlargement or not? So before answering this question, I might do an activity such as this. So you can see there, A is exactly the same picture as I had in the exemplar question of Rosie and Tommy. And all I've done is slightly changed that rectangle to make images B, C and D. This time, can you spot which one is mathematically similar to photo A? You might want to pause the video so that you can have a look at that. In fact, there was just one image that was mathematically similar to A, and it was B. So what's the point of doing an activity such as that? Well, it's to really highlight the issue of trying to say that two shapes are similar just because they look similar. A lot of students have the misconception that they don't need to do any further work to show that two shapes are similar. So here we're just showing how difficult it is by eye to spot mathematical similarity. And we're making the point that actually to really show that two rectangles are similar, we really need to do something else. We need to do some measuring. So this leads on to, well, how are we going to show whether these two photographs are similar or not? And actually, we need to do some measuring. So asking the students to get their rulers out and do some measuring. So on the shape on the left, we can see we've got side lengths of 8 centimetres and 11 centimetres, and the shape on the right, we can see 12.5 centimetres for both lengths. So Are the two shapes similar? Well, I think it's really important as well to look at different ways of thinking about this. We could look between the shapes. So we could look at the scale factor enlargements for the corresponding sides. And we can see that the scale factor that would map 8 centimetres onto 12.5 centimetres must be different to the scale factor that maps 11 centimetres onto 12.5 centimetres. So they can't be similar. But it's also interesting to look at the within shape side length ratios as well. So here we can see that the ratio of the side lengths for the shape on the right, well, we can see it's 1:1. Both of the lengths are the same, and that's clearly not the same for the shape on the length on the left. So they can't be mathematically similar. And of course, we want to include some non-standard examples to really deepen that understanding of similarity. And I really like this one. And of course, there's lots of these that you can find actually. You can find triangle pile-ups, some really interesting ones. I really like this one. How I would do it in the classroom, I would start with having it as a goal-free problem. So something like ABCD is a rectangle. What do you know? What can you find out? And then that idea that the student's going to get out their rulers and their protractors. So they're going to practice measuring those angles and measure some lengths and tell me what they know and what they can find out before asking them, is triangle CDE similar to BCF? And explain your answer. So through those example questions, the students are really getting a deeper understanding of similarity. I've chosen a question from our premium resources to follow this up. The reason I've chosen this question is that there's so much more in it than meets the eye. First of all, I really like it because there's more than two shapes for the students to compare. I also really like it because the shapes are in different orientations. And finally, the students get an opportunity to perhaps use both within and between side length ratios. Now, the key question here is, how did you decide which shapes to tick? So the idea that the students are thinking about their strategy. And also this speed bubble here is just to prompt the students to talk about what they're finding out. So how would I approach it? Well, let's look at this shape that I've highlighted in green and compare it to shape A. Well, if I look at shape A, I'd probably start with these two sides and I'd probably think, okay, well, those two sides are equal in length. So I know if a shape is going to be similar to this, then the corresponding sides also need to be equal in length. And I can see for the green shape, that's clearly not the case. So they can't be similar. Okay, now let's have a look at this purple shape. So this time I'm going to compare the two lengths that are highlighted in red, the one that's highlighted in red on A and then the one on the purple shape. And I can see that if the two shapes are similar, then the scale factor of enlargement is 1.5. So now I'm using a between shape side length ratio. I'm looking at that scale factor. So I've changed my strategy slightly. Now, if the scale factor is 1.5, now if I compare the blue length highlighted on A with the blue length highlighted on the purple shape, oh, well, I can see the scale factor there. If we have a look at the lengths, I can see the scale factor isn't 1.5. Therefore, I can eliminate that shape too. Those two shapes aren't similar. So like I say, there's just so much more than meets the eye with this question. And it's one I think that's really worth exploring further with the students. So here's another question from the premium resources that I really like. Perhaps pause the video here and read through it and see if you can explain why Dora is wrong. Okay, I really like this question because it's clearly drawing the student's attention to a certain point. So what is it that this question is really focusing on? Well, it's orientation, isn't it? It's this idea of making sure that you get the correct corresponding sides. So if we look at that second rectangle, I need to tip it, I need to rotate it to be able to see those corresponding sides. So actually, we should have had the height ratio was 100 to 60 and not 100 to 48, and the base ratio was 80 to 48. And that's why Dora is wrong. So I just like the fact that it really focuses on that one thing, the idea of getting the correct corresponding sides. Okay, so just to summarize with some key points, I really think it's important to give the students some exploration time around similarity. So instead of rushing them through it and getting on to finding missing sides, I think if we can give them some time, it's really helpful in terms of their thought process around similarity. And also to look at different methods for thinking about similarity. So within shape and between shape ratios, really promote that idea of flexible thinking. There isn't just one way of doing things. And then perhaps comparing several shapes rather than just two shapes, which is more standard. Using non-standard examples, of course, can really get them thinking more deeply. And finally, this idea of changing the orientation of the shape to make sure that they really have that understanding around corresponding sides. So I hope you've really enjoyed this secondary snack. I hope there's something that you can take away and use in your classroom. And I hope you come back for more of our snacks. Thank you for watching. Bye.